Hey team, and welcome back to the second part in our series about temperament. In the first video, we talked about the primary qualities of heat, coldness, moisture, and dryness, and their individual powers or meanings, as well as how they combine to make the four elements. In this video, we're going to build on that, talking a bit more about the four elements, the first principles, and the four temperaments of sanguine, choler, melancholy, and phlegm. Something I said in the first video that bears repeating now is that the humors are the manifestations of the elements in the body, and then so the temperaments are the manifestations of the elements in the mind, because those humors mix with the mind. The four humors were the foundation of medical science and philosophy for nearly 2,000 years. In this system, health was a state of balance, or homeostasis, between the four humors in the body, and disease resulted from imbalance in these four bodily fluids, with different disease symptoms manifesting depending on which of these four fluids was most dominant in the illness. Unfortunately, the grand majority of people are not born with the four humors perfectly in balance, but will experience a sort of natural imbalance in what is referred to as either their individual or their natal temperament. This is something that can be discovered via astrological technique or through something like a questionnaire, which we'll kind of get into in this video. This means that almost everyone is born with a mixture of humors or a temperament that favors one or two humors above another. This favoring or dominance of humors will express itself either physiologically, either in the body type of the individual, or the kinds of health problems that that person faces sort of more regularly or otherwise is more susceptible to. But it will also manifest in their personality and the way they respond to outside stimuli. So while the four humors and the relationship to one another is primarily used within a physical medical context, I actually won't be talking much about that here, but instead we're going to focus on the psychological aspect of it. If you want to know more about medical astrology, including the use of natal temperament and how to determine it, I actually teach a 12-week course through the International Academy of Astrology, so check that out if you're at all interested. To start with, it's important to remember that the four humors and the resulting temperament are combinations of the four primary qualities, so having a good foundation of what the four qualities mean and what they can do helps a lot. The first temperament we're going to talk about, the sanguine temperament, is caused by predisposition towards the sanguine or blood humor, which is associated with the element of air and is made from the qualities of heat and moisture. As the combination of the hot and moist qualities, the sanguine temperament is the most inherently life-affirming and supportive. These characteristics spill over into the individuals for whom this temperament dominates. They are socially conscious and motivated, they're quick to help those in need, and very supportive of friends and acquaintances. The blood humor to which the temperament corresponds carries feelings of joy and mirth and a general easygoing disposition, making the sanguine natives friendly, magnanimous, and overall fun to be around. The main drive behind the sanguine temperament is social connections and experience. The hot quality encourages action and motion, while the moist quality wants to collect and bring things together. This often manifests as a love of travel, or otherwise a curiosity regarding new things and experiences that are outside of the day-to-day norm. The sanguine individual is constantly looking for their next favorite thing, whether it's a new favorite restaurant, television show, book, type of food, or whatever else. The sanguine temperament is perpetually on the run from complacency. The most important experience, though, is the experience of other people. The sanguine temperament is very socially motivated and desires those social connections and relationships. But the inherent sort of hyperactivity in the hot quality can keep them from making deep and meaningful friendships, defaulting instead to relationships that may be more of the shallow acquaintance variety. The social butterfly, the sanguine temperament always knows somebody who has the connection, which can be useful in, say, gaining favors, but does run the risk of making all relationships seem on the surface transactional. This isn't how the sanguine temperament views interpersonal relationships, but it is sort of the natural consequence of only reaching out to people when they're needed for something. This natural inclination towards maneuvering social relationships and the emotional intelligence that implies is one of the sanguine temperament's biggest strengths. They make fantastic moderators, mediators, and interveners, as they have a natural understanding of compromise. The moist quality can easily hold two conflicting viewpoints at the same time, highlight their similarities, and translate them to the opposing sides to help foster deeper understanding and, hopefully, common ground. Sanguines also naturally fit in everywhere, easily making friends between cliques and other groups, finding the variety inherent in having friends from multiple walks of life very appealing. Above all, the sanguine temperament desires harmony and for people to get along. Conflict is not something that comes natural to these individuals, and they often don't see the point in conflict or getting upset about things. Their innate heat refuses to let them dwell on situations and encourages them to express themselves in the moment, which gives them a strong optimism, as nothing can really weigh or keep them down for very long. It also helps them work through personal conflict and hurt feelings, as their own inherent connection with their emotional state gives them great insight into how they are feeling and the source of those feelings, which allows them to immediately address perceived slights or transgressions instead of keeping these feelings bottled up inside to fester and then, ultimately explode outward sometime later. When met with resistance or, denied a request, they understand and often don't push back on it. Instead, they try to come from another angle to try to find a necessary compromise or, the next best thing that they could possibly get. While the sanguine temperament is traditionally one of the most desirable of the four temperaments, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, though the darker sides of the sanguine temperament are still pretty light, really. For many, the lack of staying power inherent in this temperament makes them come across as flighty, unstable, inconsistent, and unreliable. While they easily move between differing groups of people, they may be viewed as disloyal in some contexts or not as serious to more established individuals. Sanguines have a strong sense of justice and are quick to point out where things are unfair or could otherwise use adjustment, but they can be weak on offering practical solutions, which can lead others to kind of see sanguine temperament as either nagging or kind of problem-seeking, always kind of looking for trouble or stirring stuff up. They are great listeners and can encourage people to open up to them very easily, but can be oversharers themselves, whether with their own personal information that kind of nobody really wants to hear, or the information of others that they probably should have kept to themselves. This can cause them to be seen as gossips or busybodies, getting themselves overly involved in other people's affairs and struggling to mind their own business. The sanguine temperament means well, but not everyone is as open to outside involvement or sharing information as they are, and respecting other people's privacy can be a boundary that sanguines repeatedly have to check themselves on. The sanguine temperament is the eternal enemy of boredom and complacency. Unfortunately, both the hot and moist qualities are rather emotion-oriented and can be seen as hyperactive, resulting in the sanguine individuals becoming bored with things fairly easily. This can cause problems in long-term relationships where the sanguine may more quickly become bored with a partner and move on when things get too serious or too monotonous, leading to a reputation as non-committal. It can also cause difficulty in skill development or other goals that require long-term planning, resulting in sanguines being more like a jack of all trades. Because of this, they may also be seen as less intelligent and less well-read than their peers. Instead, they may be more concerned with social conventions, fads, and pop culture, giving the rise to kind of the airhead stereotype. They would rather know things that other people know and can connect with that rather than just kind of like being, like heady or talking about things or interested in topics that other people may find difficult to relate to. The sanguine reaction style is with compassion. When things go wrong or there's a problem that is presented, the sanguine temperament desires unity and understanding. Their immediate reaction is to sit down and talk about what has happened with those involved so that everyone may get on the same page and brainstorm solutions to the crisis. Ultimately, though, it is that unified front that is most important to the sanguine, and as long as that can be obtained, it isn't so important that the situation actually be resolved. Just as long as everyone kind of agrees on maybe what that solution ought to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be implemented. The sanguine temperament is friendly, easygoing, flexible, and supportive, but struggles with routine, which it perceives as monotony most often. It lacks the staying power necessary to really familiarize themselves with subjects or processes, opening them up to looking clueless, incompetent, or uninterested. There is strength here, though, as the sanguine temperament is often conversationally familiar with enough topics to excel in finding something that they can discuss with anyone. This increases their wide social net along with their general approachability. There is a danger with being perceived as a busybody and overly involved in other people's business, but it stems from a genuine desire and enthusiasm to help. The second temperament, the choleric temperament, is the product of heat and dryness. Choler is one of the manifestations of the fire element. Like fire, who lives on sort of the periphery of the Aristotelian natural place scheme, the natives of this temperament naturally seek to rise up and be recognized. One of the more natural methods of doing this is through direct competition with others, where one's skills or knowledge is tested against those of perceived rivals. This can be a good way to gauge relative skill, but does put a strain on relationships if they are constantly locked in competition. It is this desire to be distinguished and be recognized that fuels cholerics. The innate heat of this temperament causes it to want to rise above, and the innate dryness causes it to want to be separated from the pack. And this can happen by being number one. The choleric individuals want to be known for a particular skill or knowledge set, and will often seek further specialty in order to accomplish this. They want to be the person that everyone thinks of when it comes to whatever their topic is. Whether it's something kind of general, like being the tax guru or the computer person that everybody goes to for help, or, something very specific, like medical practices in 17th century England, the choleric wants to be the most well-known person in that field, and will often have their feelings hurt if they are not immediately thought of first. Confidence comes naturally to choleric individuals, and this draws others to them. Outspoken, fearless, and generally inclined towards conflict, cholerics are more apt to speak up for themselves and will even do so for others who may shy away from conflict if they have more to lose. This obviously will inspire others, and cholerics can easily find themselves in leadership or representative type roles as other people place their trust in them to be able to affect change. In many cases, the first leadership role is a defining moment for natural cholerics, and is usually a test of character. Will they become the boss who, tells others what to do, or will they be a true leader who inspires and leads by example? The dry quality also imparts a desire to be separate, which can manifest as a general dislike of other people. Where there is dryness, there is friction, and this creates difficulties in relating with others. Empathy is not a choleric strong suit, and understanding the emotions of others is not high on the choleric priority list, leading to other people to see cholerics as dismissive or uninterested with anything that doesn't directly involve them. This also will naturally make communication with more sensitive individuals more difficult. The choleric temperament is more logic-oriented and may say things without filtering them or considering the emotional impact and appropriateness, instead leading others to see them as blunt, harsh, or insensitive, while the choleric more sees their word choice as either honest or efficient, choosing to prioritize those things over, say, the feelings of others, how all that information is taken, and taking responsibility for how they make other people feel. Relationship struggles are naturally compounded when the natural inclination to compete is factored in. Relationships are by definition a team sport, and competition can lead to feelings of resentment or inadequacy, which puts a huge strain on any relationship. For this reason, it's best that cholerics find other ways to compete or push themselves, such as gaming or sports, something they do separate from their partners. If there's one type of relationship that comes very easily to a choleric, it is the rival type relationship. And while this can become a deep and meaningful friendship, it starts off at a disadvantage and is an inclination that is best resisted, as it can just as easily lead to targeted hate. Dryness is a discriminatory quality. It sees the differences in things and classifies them accordingly, while the heat quality supercharges the process, allowing it to occur almost instantaneously. This results in near immediate judgments and decisive shot calling, which can be especially helpful and even life-saving in critical situations where time is a luxury. This habit applied indiscriminately, however, can lead to a very black and white outlook, where everything falls somewhere to one side of good and bad, or useful and useless dichotomy, leaving no room for gray and no appreciation for nuance. Perhaps the worst possible manifestation of this trait is the development of an us versus them mentality, where this immediate judgment is aimed at other people and informed by perceived differences between them and oneself. When taken too far and combined with a general dislike for others and the antisocial attitudes that often come naturally to this temperament, you have the recipe for things like nationalism, racism, misogyny, and other forms of targeted hate towards groups perceived as different, bad, or useless. Known for their courage in the face of danger and general fearlessness, cholerics are natural risk takers. While their moves can be bold and rewarding, they can also be short-sighted and dangerous, putting themselves and others at risk for negative consequences due to not thinking things through properly. They may make decisions impulsively because they don't want to do all the research necessary to make a fully formed decision, which can put them in the way of financial disadvantage and even bodily harm. Cholerics feel a natural sense of invulnerability, compounded by their high self-esteem and optimism, as they know in their heart that they will come out on top. If there is one thing that comes more naturally to cholerics in competition, it is conflict. Naturally oppositional, cholerics are argumentative and combative. This can be great when it's aimed at correcting an injustice or leveling the playing field, but tends to create a lot of problems for choleric individuals as they maneuver their day-to-day life. They do not like to be controlled or told what to do and are inherently distrustful of authority. The best lesson that a choleric can learn is what battles are worth fighting for, as continuously engaging with others in this way will put a strain on relationships and their own energy and emotional health. Detail-oriented, the choleric temperament understands the inner workings of systems and is solution-oriented. They want to correct mistakes and streamline processes, especially if those mistakes belong to other people. Gifted with a supernatural ability to focus in on weaknesses, cholerics are natural diagnosticians and are great at determining solutions to counter the weaknesses in whatever organization they are a part of or project they are working on. This temperament's default reaction is with anger. When something happens, it is natural for the choleric individual to become fired up. At worst, this can be someone who lashes out at others for their problems, but at its best is the reaction of someone who will not be beaten. Their anger fuels them and gives them the strength necessary to rise to the challenge and directly face the situation with a can-do attitude, helping them overcome anything. The choleric temperament is strong, self-assured, and sees life as a challenge or series of challenges to be overcome. It struggles to relate to others, but will stand up for them if the need arises, making them excellent leaders. They are tested by how they treat others, especially those who are below them in social or organizational hierarchies. They are competitive and think themselves untouchable, which leads them to bite off more than they can chew. Anger and self-righteousness come easily to them, and their hot-headed temper can get them into more trouble than it's worth. Learning that not everything is worth fighting over and that other people are important to keep around are important lessons, but heaven help the fool who tries to mess with the choleric's loved ones. Also, while we're on the topic of the choleric temperament and being angry, I just kind of want to share that I had to go to 4 different stores to find these little miniature umbrellas, without which, this video couldn't work. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Ruby for the Party City tip. They did have them, so this video was made possible thanks to viewers like you. That's kind of fun to say. Come here. What are you doing here? At the beach. And definitely not in the dining room at all. Blossom. Anyway, moving on. The melancholic temperament celebrates the marriage of cold and dryness, and is the manifestation of the earth element in the body. Here we see the manifestation of coldness primarily in the outlook and demeanor of the melancholic type, who tends to suffer from lower self-esteem and doesn't seem as driven, motivated, or energetic as some of the other temperament types. This temperament is of a slower pace, preferring to think through its actions and the consequences thereof before deciding on the best plan. Lower self-esteem can often lead to lower self-worth in the melancholic individuals, who may need more of a pep talk before committing to trying particularly difficult or challenging things. There is a lack of belief in the self that must be overcome. Pragmatic and self-protective, the melancholic temperament has a realistic outlook on life, one that is not conditioned on promises, wishes, or fairy tales. This can be very helpful as it keeps one's expectations reasonable, keeps them from getting their hopes up over nothing, and protects them from potentially being hurt. Though it can also sour easily and warp into a jaded or pessimistic worldview where the negative is expected and emphasized, completely leaving any objectivity or realism behind. Coldness is naturally an unexpressive quality, and we've explored this when it comes to self-esteem or self-worth, but it also impacts how melancholics react to things or express themselves. Just as the word cold implies it as it is used today, the melancholic temperament is often emotionally detached and stoic. This can be great when it comes to heat-of-the-moment situations where the melancholic individual is most likely to remain calm and composed. It allows them to remain in control of the situation and handle it appropriately, as they are less likely to panic or overreact. Unfortunately, it also means they are less likely to speak up when the situation is appropriate, leaving themselves unheard and their opinion or feeling unaccounted for. Melancholics also struggle with handling conflict, where they are unlikely to call out another person for their bad behavior, and instead hold onto their anger or annoyance, bottling it up and allowing it to fester. Prone to grudges and harboring hurt feelings, the melancholic would rather idealize revenge and getting even than engage in direct conversation about the matter, partly because their more pessimistic outlook on life and lack of faith in others leads them to believe that it will result in no change anyway. Strongly logic-oriented, it is important for things to make sense and have a logical flow to them before they can receive the melancholic stamp of approval. This can lead to considerations which are deemed more on the emotional or subjective side of things to be left on the sideline. Seeing everything as an emotionless being, the melancholic makes difficult choices, often without the considerations of others' feelings, and sometimes even without their input. It's very refreshing. Relationships and anything involving other people tend to be the areas of life where melancholics struggle the most. Because they favor logic, emotion isn't something that they value very highly or understand very deeply. Emotional intelligence does not come naturally to melancholics, and they may even be sort of out of touch with their own emotions. Not to say that melancholics do not experience emotion, but they often have a more difficult time connecting their emotional state with the responsible trigger. Empathizing with and understanding the emotional needs of others is a different beast altogether. At the extreme, the melancholic may struggle to have appropriate emotional reactions to things, especially struggling to convey and experience excitement, contentedness, and joy. As coldness is passive and dryness is separative, the melancholic temperament is more self-isolative than others. Preferring to stay in and keep to themselves, this temperament generally dislikes people, and especially gatherings of people. Not one to get out and socialize, the melancholic usually needs to be encouraged by their friends to get out and do more, and are normally begrudgingly drugged along by others to participate. This temperament has strong organizational and categorization skills, making them experts in structure and procedure. The melancholic temperament is very detail-focused, potentially to the point of anal retentive characteristics. This makes them strong in organizing, whether that be organizing and cleaning clutter, restructuring a group, or re-strategizing operational procedures. The melancholic temperament is the one that you want on your team, even though it probably doesn't want to be on a team at all. The melancholic is a strong believer in everything having a place and everything needing to stay in that place, and is good at finding a use for anything and everything. Melancholy is the temperament of the scholar, scientist, physician, and magician, as they deeply probe the universe for answers. A rock falling to the bottom of a well beautifully illustrates the melancholic commitment to getting to the bottom of things and solving unanswered questions. Focus comes very easily to melancholics. They are the most equipped when it comes to commitment, discipline, and follow-through, allowing them to easily complete projects or adhere to patterns and habits that they have scheduled and planned out for themselves, such as exercise or study schedules. Of course, this adherence can also manifest as a resistance to change and uncovers a hidden fixity to the temperament. Once it's made up its mind, it's over. Because the decision-making process takes such a long time with melancholics, this is the temperament that does all the research and gathers all the facts. Once they have reached their conclusion, it takes a lot of effort to have them reconsider. The same is true for procedures and methods that they have adopted. It is usually only through the introduction of newer, better information that melancholics are prompted to reconsider a decision. Emotional pleas do not usually reach them, even if they themselves are negatively affected. It is more likely that the melancholic will commit to suffering through any discomfort or negative side effect rather than go through the pains of changing the system, as they are more likely to view suffering as a means to the end of personal growth. The default reaction from melancholics to almost any situation is depression or self-defeat. Though they excel in many of the skills necessary to be successful and overcome obstacles, they tend to lack the crucial component of self-belief. They've already made up their mind that the problem is too big for them to handle, and they often decline to be involved or step up to the challenge. What's the point of giving it a try when they know they're going to fail anyway? The melancholic temperament is hardworking, calm, and logical, making them a great addition to any team in a supportive type role. The realm of emotions is more difficult for them to maneuver, which can lead to social awkwardness and a preference for isolation, but they are great and loyal friends. Deep thinkers and constantly curious about what else there is to know, they search and dig to find more information before making a decision or throwing their weight behind a cause. Though practical and realistic, it doesn't take too much for them to inadvertently adopt pessimistic outlooks and depressive attitudes, instead choosing to see the worst in people or seeing themselves as unlucky when compared to other people. No person is an island, and we cannot get through life alone, but a little cautious optimism never hurt anyone. Finally, coldness and moisture come together to create the phlegmatic temperament, which is known for its deep feeling, sensing, and empathizing nature. As a cold temperament, phlegmatics are more of the shy and quiet type, preferring to give others the spotlight and take care of their own business without much fanfare. This can be great as it allows other people to have their turn, which is something that phlegmatics are generally concerned with anyway, but can have the negative consequence of the phlegmatic being overlooked. Not one to step into center stage, the phlegmatic temperament may shun any situation where they are required or encouraged to speak up and make themselves heard. Conflict avoidant to the extreme, phlegmatics generally desire peace and understanding in their environment, and they are most likely to capitulate to maintain it. This temperament has a historical association with cowardice and martyrdom, being unwilling, in some cases, to fight for what they deserve or stand up to others trying to take advantage of them. This can be very noble when it's a caretaker sacrificing something for the benefit of the nursed, but much less so when the relationship is supposed to be more equal or egalitarian. Deeply reflective and internal, the phlegmatic temperament is very contemplative and spends a lot of time in their own mind and imagination. This can result in a rich inner experience of daydreams and plans that is masked behind a rather blank expression and uncommunicated to the outside world. Many phlegmatics instead turn to art, poetry, or some other form of visual expression in order to express all of the feelings and thoughts that they have, as these can't really be properly conveyed in words. An inability to find the right words or express things is common in this temperament, and communication in writing may be a better avenue to explore. This temperament is somewhat more inclined than the others to utilize substances in order to enrich their inner experience or enliven their lived one. Phlegm is a thick humor, and this often manifests as dulled senses. Phlegmatics will prefer more heavily seasoned foods and stronger or more intense sensations, as otherwise they may not really taste or feel anything at all. This does have the added benefit of having an increased pain threshold when compared to some of the other temperaments. Comfort is really the name of the game for the phlegmatic temperament. This can manifest as a desire for literal physical comfort and often spending more in order to obtain higher quality furnishings, clothing, and bedding. The desire for comfort may also manifest in lifestyle choices, adopting something of a sedentary lifestyle where the individual is mostly inactive, perhaps just performing their work duties, and then coming home to the comfort of their bed, couch, television, or computer. It can also manifest in relationships where a status quo is maintained, change is not pushed for, and people are not held accountable. Complacency is the phlegmatic's worst enemy. In their desire to maintain comfort, phlegmatics run the risk of never changing, improving, or adapting, instead preferring to repeat experiences that they already know to be enjoyable. This can range from always ordering the same meal at their same favorite restaurant, preferring to rewatch the same movies or television shows they enjoy, and can even become somewhat compulsive, such as needing to visit the same gas station for every refuel. This complacency can even bleed over into relationships that only seem to exist because they already exist, and it's easier to just let things stay the way that they are than it is to hold people accountable or make needs heard. The nightmare scenario here is the development of codependent relationships, where the phlegmatic's needs are not truly met or otherwise conditioned solely on making the other partner happy. Phlegmatics are social creatures due to the inherent moisture in the temperament, but they are not outgoing or extroverted. They would need to be hot for that, but they're cold. Instead, the social style more tends towards heavily investing in a small amount of relationships. These are individuals who have friendships that stretch back years, maybe even decades. Committing oneself to several relationships is very taxing to phlegmatics, but by focusing on a small amount of relationships, they invest in them deeply in the age-old tale of quality over quantity. Connecting to others through socialization and relationships is one aspect, but when we mix the connecting powers of moisture with the kind of the reflective character of coldness, we have an individual who creates and maintains internal or inherent connections. A deep understanding of one's own emotional nature and internal thoughts is one way this can manifest, resulting in an individual who is very aware of their own triggers and trauma, helping to facilitate healing. They may also experience nostalgia for early childhood experiences and undergo something of a rose-colored glasses search for the good old days. Phlegmatics may also feel personally connected to parts of their past, such as their ancestors, whether or not they've ever met them, their genealogy, their homeland. Phlegmatics are tradition-oriented and either strive to revive traditions of the past or create their own new ones in the present. Due to this strong considering nature, it takes a long time for phlegmatic temperament to feel comfortable with a decision. From the outside, it appears that they're hesitating or trying to avoid making the decision, but the reality is that they are more thinking about it from all sides. The moist part of this temperament easily understands the different views that may be competing with one another and effortlessly slips into their shoes. This can be very helpful when the satisfaction of multiple parties must be balanced, but it can come across as wishy-washy, as the phlegmatic may make a decision only to change their mind after some reconsideration. Unfortunately, they are also susceptible to outside influence, including the opinions of more forceful personalities. This temperament takes a wait-and-see approach to life, and their default reaction to a situation is procrastination or inaction. Not every situation is a fire that immediately needs to put out, and they prefer to wait and kind of see how things develop. A fine strategy that encourages independence in others, as the phlegmatic temperament is not one to play hero and immediately dive in to correct the situation. This facilitates kind of a hands-off approach to life, parenting, teaching, and mentoring that many will respond positively to. At times, though, this reaction style may be because of underestimating the situation or otherwise just not having the energy or capacity to deal with it, and may morph into something more like wishful thinking as they ignore the situation and hope that it will take care of itself. The phlegmatic temperament is deeply feeling and caring, but struggles to properly express everything that they experience. Artistic souls with a deep inner life, they are understanding and willing to listen to other people's concerns, frustrations, and stories, but tend to be slow to share their own. They may find themselves easily influenced and put upon by others who may regard them as little more than a doormat to be taken advantage of, but will truly give their all for relationships that are worth their while. Loyal and supportive, phlegm aims for fairness, inclusion, equality, and treating others the way that they would want to be treated. So that was sort of a more in-depth look at the four temperaments individually, but because certain temperaments share qualities, of course, it can look like there is a decent amount of overlap between them in how they think, how they act, how they see the world. So let's take a second and compare and contrast those temperaments that share qualities and talk about how they differ from one another to create better portraits of the four. Starting off, the sanguine and the choleric temperaments have heat as a common quality, but the expression or flow of that heat is differentiated in the two via the contrasting qualities of moisture for the sanguine temperament and dryness in the choleric temperament. While both of the temperaments share a similar positive outlook on life, healthy self-esteem, expressiveness, and assertiveness, it really comes down to the difference in how that is directed towards or accepted by other people. We see the difference most immediately in how the two temperaments maneuver social situations. The sanguine is very easygoing and enjoys being around others. For them, socializing and being with others are truly enjoyable experiences that energize them. The choleric, on the other hand, is less inclined to be social and, on a personal level, is generally more difficult to get along with, requiring others to adapt to them or be left behind. Flexibility and openness are other key differences between the two temperaments. The sanguine individual is very open to adaptation and suggestion, and regards any change in plans as an unforeseen adventure or an unexpected opportunity to be explored. A last-minute change of plans doesn't faze the sanguine, who is open to change in order to accommodate other people's tastes or even schedules. Similarly, their innate emotional intelligence and openness to alternative viewpoints means the sanguine does not crave closure in relationships or in even entertainment. Open-ended stories, for instance, are an exciting blank canvas for sanguines to paint as they see fit, while relationships that just kind of stop don't really bother the sanguine very much, who's more than happy to pick it back up later if such an opportunity presents itself. The choleric is very different and much more rigid in their worldview and preferences. Changing plans, especially the closer it is to the event, is likely to elicit an angry or irritated response, and time must now be spent negotiating the change or, arguing about it. Things were agreed upon in advance, and it's important that commitments be kept. Similarly, the color penchant for adopting a black and white, right or wrong worldview almost requires closure by definition. Whether this means figuring out who was wrong in an argument or relationship to properly close the book on it, or being unaccepting of ambiguous situations, whether in real life or media. There must be a bad guy to blame or someone to assign fault to, even if the reality of the situation is more complex than that. The choleric is likely to respond with annoyance and is likely to miss the point of media with more open endings, seeing them as waste of times or overall less enjoyable experiences. The differences in flexibility and openness return when comparing the sanguine and choleric work styles. The sanguine is much more flexible in what they are able to or open to doing. This often results in a jack-of-all-trades type of situation, where they are decently talented in performing many different roles or tasks. More aware of how the world moves around them, the sanguine is more interested in collecting different types of experiences or skills, as they never know what they might need in a situation and what that might require them to do. The choleric, on the other hand, feels much more in control and is only really interested in collecting skills or experiences that have a strong interest in or feel will get them kind of to where they want to go. Just for like an example, the choleric is much less likely to kind of double major in university, preferring to focus exclusively on one thing. Should they decide to double major, the secondary subject is likely to reinforce or support the primary subject in some logical way. The sanguine, on the other hand, is much more likely to double major and to select a secondary subject that is completely different from the primary, instead preferring to be more well-rounded in their education or their life experiences. Their approach to closure also mirrors the temperament's relationships to life and the meaning thereof. Sanguine are more aware of the way the world moves around them and the overall connectedness of things, and is driven by a sense of freedom. Their desire is to go out and explore, broaden their horizons, and have the opportunity to say yes to anything they want. The cholerics tend to be more closed off from the world, only seeing it for the machine that they believe that it is. They are driven primarily by a sense of duty and the belief that they are here to accomplish something, if only they can discover what that is. The choleric and melancholic temperaments are united in dryness, but differ in heat and cold. Our main difference here relates to self-image and expression. While neither temperament especially enjoys social functions, we'll say, or the company of others, the heat inherent within choler compels them to be involved, while melancholy's coldness prefers to keep to themselves and observe. Distance must be maintained by both due to the influence of the shared quality of dryness, but heat encourages cholerics to stand above and be distinguished from the pack, while coldness encourages melancholics to stand to the side of as an outlier. It's this distinction in assertiveness on the choleric side and passivity on the melancholics that describes the key differences between the two. As such, the choleric is likely to actively seek recognition for their accomplishments, while the melancholic typically won't. They will both experience the anger and disappointment that comes with not being recognized, though, but the passivity allows melancholics some protection from those negative emotions. By choosing not to play the game, they don't take losing as hard, and are more inclined to blame something outside of their control for their failure. Cholerics lack this self-protective outlook, but bounce back better from disappointments and upsets, as their self-esteem can take more lumps before showing any wear. Though both temperaments are logically oriented, the choleric is more impulsive in its decision-making, making near instantaneous judgments about situations, plans, and people. Melancholics, on the other hand, are more methodical in their approach, and prefer to take time to think things through and explore the issue from all sides before developing a plan. Here we have the distinction between impulsivity with cholerics and decisiveness in melancholics. The choleric is more hasty and may make progress more quickly, but is also more likely to make mistakes and need to reattempt, whereas melancholic is more likely to succeed on their first attempt, as they've already analyzed the situation enough to avoid some of the more obvious obstacles that the choleric just kind of ran headfirst into. The trade-off here is that the choleric is better at making decisions in the heat of the moment, and is more confident in those choices, while the melancholic is more likely to suffer from analysis paralysis under pressure. Making the situation worse, coldness desires to hold on to information, including the uncomfortable and cringe-inducing memories of the past, which can make future socialization even more awkward. Cholerics are quick to let these things go. While relationships do not necessarily come easy to either temperament, the choleric has the upper hand in this area, as their innate heat encourages them to express themselves more easily. Of course, this must be balanced, with dryness's penchant for inconsideration and insensitivity, but you will always know how a choleric individual feels about you. They'll tell you, really in no uncertain terms. The melancholic individual is more of an enigma in this regard, as they keep their thoughts and feelings close to their chest and are unlikely to voice them. This can result in awkward situations of people thinking that they're closer to a melancholic than they actually are, or melancholic individuals being more likely to hold grudges or otherwise remember perceived slights. A choleric is much more comfortable confronting somebody in the moment, perhaps overly aggressively, but usually the situation is addressed and resolved before it's allowed to morph into disdain or something more long-term, something more difficult to work out. Cholerics fit more comfortably into leadership roles, feeling very strong in the executive function and able to inspire others around them. Melancholics are averse to the spotlight and will do anything to avoid it, resulting in them preferring an advisory type role. It's not important that everybody knows their name, just as long as they can tell the difference that they're making. This preference for advising, can sour into a manipulative and controlling streak, which some of the more high energy individuals are especially susceptible to. When we're talking about melancholy versus phlegm, these two temperaments share the cold quality, but differ in moisture and dryness. Phlegm, of course, being moist, melancholics being dry. These temperaments are both internally oriented, tend to have lower self-esteem, and struggle to stand up for or express themselves. Their differences are primarily due to emotional intelligence. Phlegmatics are more emotionally oriented and sensitive to those around them. By not making waves of their own, they're able to keenly pick up on the waves others are emitting. Melancholics are more logic-oriented and tend to discount their own feelings and those of others, not really understanding or seeing value in them. This also determines how they relate to other people. The moist quality is inherently social due to its desire to connect and bring things together. This is slowed down somewhat due to the coldness inherent in the temperament, but it is not extinguished. The phlegmatic desires connection, but can only handle so many connections, resulting in few friendships, but those with long histories or are otherwise deeper and more intimate. Melancholy desires separation and prefers isolation and to keep to themselves. Here, they see themselves as being efficient and not slowed down by the incompetencies or idiosyncrasies of others. Many would describe the melancholic as irritable and difficult to work with, causing unnecessary strife in relationships or work, school, or anywhere else cooperation may be encouraged or necessary. This is in no small part to the lone wolf outlook the stereotypical melancholics have. Phlegmatics are more easygoing and thus easier to work with, which can cause them to be preferred partners, but they also may find themselves put upon or otherwise overshadowed by more forceful personalities. This is the person who kind of winds up with the most work that everybody feels like they can just push onto them. Organization and control come very naturally to melancholics, who exert classification and structure over their environments, and sometimes even the people within them. Taibu, hey, come here. Tai. Phlegmatics, on the other hand, are more hands-off and prefer to let their environment shape themselves, and people under their oversight reach their potential their own way and kind of in their own time. Of course, this can lead to clutter and disorganization, but that's just fine. Tai, come here. Come here. Yes. Between the two, melancholics will organize a bookshelf based on logical things like topic, title, or author, while the phlegmatic organization is likely to emphasize something like color or size. So both systems have, their own way of organizing, but the phlegmatic organization may be something that really only makes sense to the phlegmatics themselves. Moisture creates a fertile environment for creativity and exploration, especially in nonverbal fields of communication like art, music, and entertainment. And these are areas where the phlegmatics feel more at home in. They are activities that can be done independently and are able to convey meaningful messages as well. There's no pressure to perform or be anything other than what they are. Melancholics often struggle to really understand and appreciate art, music, poetry, and related fields. They struggle to make the connections necessary to see the meaningfulness in artistic endeavors, preferring something more objectively obvious. While neither temperament likes conflict or obstacles, the melancholic is better equipped to handle them, preferring to roll over anything in their way like a stone coming down the hill. In this, they display supreme amounts of focus and determination, overcoming their opposition in the way only a boulder rolling downhill can. Phlegmatics, on the other hand, are more likely to experience discouragement, lacking the focus, drive, and in some cases, spite inherent in the dry quality. Here we see phlegmatics throwing in the towel more often, not seeing the stress and exertion worth the potential reward that they might receive, whatever that is. While dryness helps to focus intent, it is not so good at handling multiple objectives at once, and will say no to anything that may compete with the energy necessary to complete whatever they perceive as the primary objective. Moisture's flexibility allows the phlegmatic temperament to have much more success in juggling multiple objectives, but the coldness limits the success here as well, and can lead them to feeling overwhelmed or exhausted, causing them to shut down entirely. It's important for phlegmatics to not take on more than they can handle, and especially learn to say no to those requests that are coming directly from other people. Phlegmatics are often more than willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of others and take on the workloads of others. Our final comparison is that between phlegmatics and sanguines. Here, these two temperaments share the moist quality, but different in hot and coldness. Sanguine is hot, phlegm is cold. They're unified in their approach to life and people, equally open to the connectedness and the ambiguity in life, emotionally intelligent, and both accepting and understanding of the people and events happening around them. Where they differ is on expression, action, and activity. Most obviously, the phlegmatic is much more shy and reserved, while the sanguine is more outgoing and confident. Not only does this mean that the phlegmatic has a lower sense of self-esteem than the sanguine, but they also have fewer friends, as they are less likely to put themselves out there or make the first move in the way that sanguines do. Ty, you still back there? What you doing? The sanguine is the social butterfly, introducing themselves to others, while the phlegmatic is the wallflower and needs to be approached. Ty. The lack of heat also manifests as the phlegmatic's reluctance to go and do things and their general closed-off demeanor, while the sanguine is much more adventurous and explorative, preferring to go out and try new things or visit new places. The phlegmatic is much more likely to repeat experiences that they already know to be enjoyable. The phlegmatic becomes a regular at their favorite establishments. They order the usual, and they become immersed in the history and environment of their favorite places. While both temperaments have a strong emotional intelligence, this is heavily altered by heat and coldness. The sanguine is much more expressive in their experience of emotions. They come equipped with an exceptional grace, allowing them to navigate their own intense sea of emotions expertly, and have the sense of self-esteem to not feel embarrassed or ashamed of how they feel. They are quick in letting others know how they are feeling, and they see no value in emotional games, though they are happy to invest in helping another person familiarize themselves with their own emotions. The phlegmatic, on the other hand, is much less likely to express their own emotional state. They're able to pick up on subtle hints and can read the room with utmost accuracy. This is especially interesting given the more contemporary stereotype of water signs as emotional crybabies. It's really the sanguine temperament that is more likely to exhibit such behavior. In many ways, a phlegmatic individual is much like a sanguine individual, but in slow motion. Many of the key sanguine characteristics are simply reduced, such as having fewer but deeper friendships, being less expressive about their emotions, and in a less hurry to get through life in general. They also differ in the methods they are likely to use in support of people and causes. The sanguine is more likely to get involved directly and volunteer time, while the phlegmatic will probably prefer to donate money. Both are valid methods of making a difference, but for phlegmatic individuals who already struggle with smaller energy reserves, volunteering time may require more than they are able to give. Relating to other people is a key part of the moist experience, and the two temperaments handle this differently as well. The phlegmatic is a good listener, and more likely to be used as a sounding board or a therapist to the people around them. The goal here is to balance out the concern for the well-being of others with the phlegmatic's own energy and time. More likely to sacrifice parts of themselves for the convenience of others, both of these temperaments are weak when it comes to reinforcing boundaries, but phlegmatics more so, as they lack the confidence to stand up for themselves or make their concerns known. This comes more easily to sanguines. Sanguines, on the other hand, are also good listeners and easily connect with others, but they're even better speakers. Always aware of the best words to use in any situation, they can kind of sweet talk themselves into and out of seemingly anything. This may result in others not being heard, but is more likely really to manifest as giving unwanted advice and otherwise being overly involved in other people's affairs. So that's all for our breakdown of the four temperaments and how they compare with one another, what they do, and the four temperaments were the dominant way to describe people and actions for several hundred years. Today we see temperament having been basically edged out of popular consciousness and replaced by other types of personality tests, such as like Enneagrams or Myers-Briggs typology, known as MBTI. This system builds on the theories of Carl Jung and sorts people between four pairs of types: introverted versus extroverted, sensing versus intuiting, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. This results in 16 different potential combinations. Even today, though, we see references to the four temperaments all around us, and it's not uncommon to see personality or aptitude tests describe four temperament theory with different names attached. Over the course of about 5 years, I personally have been asked to take 2 different behavioral assessment tests for different jobs as part of a team building exercise that divides employees into 4 different types of people. The first one I ended up taking was probably in 2016, and it was the Baker's Communication 4-quadrant behavior style, and instead of being labeled, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic, the 4 types of people were talkers, doers, thinkers, and guardians. Another one that I took, I think in mid-2019, was Henry Schein's Behavior Styles and Team Communication Assessment. Here, the 4 temperaments are called the performer, the commander, the analyzer, and the empathizer. In both the Schein's version and the Baker's Communication test, the correlations between the types described and the temperaments that they are trying to emulate is basically a one-to-one correspondence on almost all fronts.
And even since initially recording this video, I found another instance of the 4 temperaments being rebranded as basically corporate personality types, this time by Patrick Bet-David and his STAR system, where each letter in the word stands for one of the 4 types: S for structure, T for technical, A for action-oriented, and R for relationships. The names are a little bit misleading, as I kind of first thought that action-oriented was going to be the choleric one, but when you read the descriptions, you come to realize that structure is the melancholic type, technical is the choleric type, action-oriented is the sanguine type, and relationships is the phlegmatic type. So this is just kind of another instance of the 4 temperaments living on, just with different names attached to them.
So temperament is still in the game, even if it isn't taken as seriously. One place we continue to see the dominance of temperament theory is in language and in media, but we'll talk about that in the next video, which will focus on how tropes and writing shorthand has continued to keep temperament alive, even if it isn't immediately obvious. So stay tuned for next time, where we take a look at temperament in media and how Avatar: The Last Airbender and other popular television shows perfectly encapsulates many temperament dynamics.